In 1503, a woman was seen on the Hohe Meisner, barefoot in the frost, gathering herbs as if the cold belonged to her. 10 years later, only one record remained of her, an interrogation file. And somewhere in between, a woman becomes a threat, and then a story. At the edge of the Hohe Meisner, where the ground never fully freezes, and moisture settles over stone and roots like a thin film, she moves differently from anyone else who walks these paths. She wears no shoes, even as the frost settles into the air, and she doesn't hesitate. Her steps are steady, measured, as if the cold is not something she feels, just something she passes through. She kneels in places where others would see nothing, pulls plants from the earth, studies them briefly between her fingers, and places them into a cloth she keeps close to her body. Nothing about her movement seems uncertain, not searching, remembering. People notice her, not for long, but long enough, and that's where the story turns against her. Northern Hesse, early 16th century. The Meisner stands outside the structures that define everything below. Up there is a body of water, still, dark, the Frau Holle pond. Today, it's a destination. Back then, it was a boundary, and at that boundary, she lives. She does not belong to the village, but the village knows her, because people go to her when nothing else works. The sick, women close to childbirth, children who won't sleep, men whose bodies no longer do what they're supposed to. And some of them come back, different, not healed in the sense of a miracle, not saved from everything, but changed enough that something shifts, fever breaks, pain fades, births don't end in death, things that were stuck begin to move again, and that becomes the problem. Because she asks for nothing that fits into the existing order. No confession, no guilt, no payment for forgiveness. She works with what she knows: plants, water, time, temperature. She doesn't speak of punishment, she speaks of causes, not sin, states. She doesn't explain why something happens. She changes that it happens. And that does not fit into a system that needs suffering to be explained in order to control it. From this point on, her knowledge is no longer useful. It becomes suspicious. They call her Holle, not as a fairy tale, not as a symbol, but as a name, for a woman who knows more than she should. And this is where it stops being about one woman. It becomes about how power replaces memory. She understands the shift of seasons, knows when the ground gives something and when it doesn't, when a wound will heal and when a body is about to fail. She speaks to women about childbirth without turning it into fear, and quietly she contradicts the idea that everything that happens must be a divine test. And that's where the fracture begins, because somewhere else, at the same time, it's being decided who is allowed to interpret the world. The church is not just belief, it is structure. And structure does not tolerate explanations that exist without it. Holle doesn't argue against the church. She simply doesn't need it. And that's enough. At first, it's just conversations, quiet, casual. A man loses livestock and looks for a reason. A woman notices her husband walking toward the mountain too often. A neighbor sees land he would rather own himself. And suddenly, everything points in one direction. She knows things. She does things. She is not like us. At first, it's just a sentence, a suspicion, soft enough to be ignored. But once it's repeated, it changes everything. What was once a skill becomes a sign. That she walks barefoot in frost is no longer habit. It's evidence. That she knows plants is no longer knowledge. It's access. That she helps is no longer help. It's interference. And then her name is spoken, Not casually, deliberately. A neighbor claims she harmed him. Another says she knew things she shouldn't have known. A woman insists that after visiting her, everything got worse. None of it has to be proven. It only has to be repeated. 10 years later, all that remains is an interrogation record. It states she was seen at the pond at a specific hour, still, alone, at the water. At that same hour, another testimony places her in the village, inside a house, with a sick man. The distance between those places takes nearly 2 hours to walk. No one explains the contradiction, and no one withdraws their statement. There is no full account, no clear image, only questions and a name. That's the point where reality shifts, because a woman becomes a case, a life becomes a file, observations become accusations, and accusations form a structure that is no longer meant to find truth, but to restore order. They called her Holle, a name that would later appear in folklore as Mother Hulda. Later, they called her a witch, and with that word, everything becomes possible. Her hands are bound behind her back. The room smells of damp stone. A candle burns too close to her face. They want to know why women go to her. She waits too long before answering, and that silence becomes evidence. The questions repeat, until every answer contradicts itself. Where does your knowledge come from? Who gave it to you? What do you do at night? Why do people come to you? Why don't you need the church? Every answer that doesn't fit is made to fit. This is the moment logic breaks, because statements contradict each other and still remain. People swear they saw her at the pond and in the village at the same time. Details match, timelines don't, and no one questions it. Not because it's true, but because it's needed. Now it's no longer a sound. It's a verdict. Condemned, executed, burned. After her death, the place is checked. The pond is still, no traces. The next morning, snow falls. Too early, too even. And in the snow there are footprints, barefoot, leading to the water and ending there. And this is where the second story begins. Not the one that happened, the one that remains. Because the place stays, the pond stays, the mountain stays. But the woman disappears and returns in another form. One that no longer threatens anything. One that can be told without consequence. Frau Holle, the one who brings the snow, the one who shakes the beds. Only what was made of her. If you stand there today, everything feels quiet, almost too quiet, as if nothing ever happened. But landscapes remember differently, not in clear images, but in shifts, in moments that don't align, in sounds that don't repeat. And sometimes you notice something, a step, a sound, a presence. At first you think it's the wind. At the end, you're not sure anymore. Maybe she never disappeared. Maybe she was only replaced. From a woman who knew too much to a story that knows nothing. Subscribe to Forgotten Paths. Some places are still waiting to be remembered.